Cool, so welcome everyone to the ESL quarterfinals. This debate is between UT Mara 2 on the affirmative and NALSAR 1 on the negative. My name's Amber and I'll be chairing. The motion for this debate is that portrayals of religious deities and prophets in media should receive prior approval from relevant religious authorities. Speaking times, as you know, are 8 minutes, so unless there are any questions, I would like to welcome up the first speaker from the affirming team to speak to the motion as it stands.
I'm just gonna test my mic a little bit. Am I audible? Cool. Hold on. The identity of an individual is often intertwined with their ability to enjoy the values that they appreciate, to enjoy the moral structures that they are able to have. Under that, is there a problem? Oh, cool. Can I just restart? I panicked because I saw. Okay, cool. 3, 2, 1. The ability for individuals to be able to enjoy their lives in a way that's most meaningful is directly intertwined with their ability to see themselves in a way that is directly or accurately represented by perhaps the media and perhaps the conglomerates of the world. We think there exists a problem in status quo where minorities are often misrepresented by portrayals via the portrayals of their religious deities and prophets. You see this in movies such as Indiana Jones, misrepresenting the community, the indigenous communities in South America, for example, by making it seem as if they're cannibals or as if they're degenerates at that point of time, or even probably in more recent time, movies like American Gods portraying the Indian goddess of war, Kali, and changing the name as Mamaji within that particular context to make it seem more palatable towards the Western audience are things that are extremely harmful towards the ability for those individuals to necessarily be able to enjoy themselves, enjoy the moral structures as well as the religious structures that they want to have. I'm going to explain as to why later. There is a principal obligation for the portrayals and religious deities and prophets must first be approved by the community. Secondly, I'm going to argue why the portrayals of religious deities and prophets are a form of cultural appropriation that silences the voice of these communities. And thirdly, I'm going to argue what happens when consultation of the relevant religious authorities and communities is required when it comes to portrayals of those particular religious deities and prophets. Before that, I have a few points of clarifications to be made. The first, what is this debate necessarily about? This debate is an assessment of the portrayal of deities and prophets as of right now and how it affects the communities that subscribes to those particular belief systems. The burden for each team in that then necessarily is to prove why parts probably or maybe the portrayals of in itself is something that's probably good or bad for the community. Under the side of affirmative will prove that it is harmful. The third clarification here is in regards to how those portrayals oftentimes look like. We see this in media, for example, as I mentioned within the example of American Gods. You also see this in the portrayal of probably magazines like Charlie Hebdo in Paris, where they drew the Prophet Muhammad without necessarily taking into consideration of how that might affect the Muslim community in Paris. We also see this in the commercial sector, where the Native Americans had something that is seen as holy by the Native Americans being sold just freely in urban outfitters without necessarily taking into account as to what those things actually mean for those particular communities. Now, what does this prior approval from relevant religious authorities mean under our side of the house? We would expect for corporations and film production companies, for example, to actively go and seek approval from those religious communities. These communities are given the right and choice to reject on whether or not those companies can portray the particular deity or prophet that they subscribe to. They are given that particular choice, and we think that choice is one that is extremely important. Now, arguments. The first, why principally the portrayals of religious deities and prophets must first be approved by the community. There are 3 levels to this. The first is that these communities are the parties who are directly affected by the portrayals itself, especially when we look at how individuals are deeply connected towards those deities and prophets, where it makes up their identity and it is how they self-actualize by being able to find solace with probably how those entities uh, accurately portrayed. Accurately portrayed. Within the as of right now, media portrayal often becomes largely inaccurate or even offensive to some extent. We pointed you to the example of Charlie Hebdo, where there's an actual limitation towards how you are able to perceive the Prophet Muhammad within the within the Muslim community, as a point where you cannot ever draw perfection, and that's the message that is the Muslim community wants to have. But at the point where Charlie Hebdo tries to portray Muhammad, especially in an extreme light at that particular point of time, that becomes largely offensive towards the Muslim communities, and that's a huge no-no for the Muslim communities. The second prong towards this principle is that these communities knows the best when it comes to the representation of those particular deities and prophets. Given that they know the limitations at which how the representation of those deities should look like, we think they base it on the actual way in which those entities should be described, right? Where it's through scriptures, for example, or the relevant religious texts that they want to have. The portrayals of media, for example, or even the commercial sector often takes only the aesthetic part of those particular portrayals. So for example, when it comes to American God and the God of Kali, at within that particular show, it was showcased that Kali is only a person who works at the diner, that he serves the people as this maternal entity within that particular thing, but not necessarily telling us the contextual character of that particular entity itself. It becomes largely inaccurate at a point where it changes the way in which those entities should have acted based on the scriptures and based on the relevant religious texts that these individuals subscribe to. The third prong of this principle is that these communities are also directly harmed by those inaccurate portrayals. This, we think, is extremely harmful when you see stereotypes over Muslims by Western movies and their portrayals with the Muslim prophets like Noah, for example, like Adam to some extent, and they are seen as degenerates who have intercourse with gods. That becomes largely offensive at the point where individuals are seen as a certain set group, and those things becomes a norm within a particular community, especially the Western audience. It increases stereotypes, increases misunderstanding towards those communities. That's largely harmful. Second argument, why the portrayals of those religious deities and prophets are a form of cultural appropriation. There are two levels to this. The first is that there exists a power asymmetry between the media and corporations and the affected community. Within that, often the voices of those minorities will never be enough to counter the power of the whole Hollywood or the massive corporations like H&M or like perhaps Urban Outfitters at that point of time. We think they are unable to call out those companies sufficiently to be able to make them pull those items from the shelves. But even if those things are possible, as I pointed out within the example of Native Americans calling out Urban Outfitters, it happens after a particular period of time where the harm is already done. Even at that point of time, it becomes only a reactionary measure to limit harm, but not to limit the harm. At least on the outside of that, we're able to prevent the harm from the very get-go, where those companies cannot portray ever those kind of deities and prophets without necessarily taking into consideration the approval from those relevant communities. The second level here is often that the narrative created already becomes a norm in the general public, where portrayals of the indigenous communities in South America, for example, by movies like Indiana Jones, as well as multiple other movies that portrays how cannibalism looks like within South America, indicates the power of Hollywood within this particular time in changing the mindsets of individuals in viewing those indigenous communities. We think that particular portrayal becomes a norm in society and becomes much harder for it to provide accurate information at that point of time and to disprove those portrayal of within those movies. Now, thirdly, what happens when consultation of the relevant religious authorities and communities is required on the outside of the house? Number one, it provides more accountability over the false representation, where there is more ability to keep media institutions accountable, and this substantially changes the way in which the media represents those specific communities. We think in the worst case scenario, where there might be zero portrayals of those communities and they do not necessarily get the media attention that perhaps they want, we think that's good because at least it's something that doesn't harm them at the end of the day, or that it at least doesn't portray them inaccurately. Even if it means that there's lesser form of portrayals at the end of the day, I think at least it provides agency towards individuals over how they're portrayed in media and over how they should be judged by society. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now, to open the case for the negating team, I'd like to welcome up the first speaker.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Could you just give me a second, please? Okay. Can I start?
Yep, when you're ready.
Before moving on to our constructive material, let's engage with what side AF has brought to this debate so far, right? They tell you that the principally the portrayals must be approved by the community which that media is portraying, right? Let us look at how this model would work, right? Who are the people that would in fact be approving or controlling the narrative or controlling the image of these deities and prophets that are put out in the public? It's not like a poll that you take among all the followers of the religion as to how they'd like to be portrayed. There's likely to be one central authority, such as like a particular Muslim imam or like the church or like particular powerful Protestant boards or Catholic churches, which get to determine how the religion is going to be portrayed, right? So, all the material that they bring to you about how principally the people who are being portrayed should have a say in how they're being portrayed is not likely to manifest in their world, right? What's going to happen is that the religious orthodoxy or whichever religious body has power in that particular over that particular religion controls the complete narrative over how that religion can be portrayed in society, right? So it's not like you're reflecting the sentiments of the people who are accessing that media, or you're reflecting or you're taking into consideration the views of the people who are being affected by that media particularly. You're most likely to be guided by the dominant narrative that is pushed by the religious heterodoxy in that particular religion. So at that point, their entire constructive about how principally you have an obligation to the people who are going to like watch your show and who are going to be affected by it doesn't stand on their side of the house, right? Because at the point where one particular body is controlling what can be shown on TV and what can't be shown on TV, you're more likely to exclude the experiences of the millions of followers of that religion, which may differ in the way that they express that religion or experience or practice that religion than the way that the like main religious body says, right? Secondly, they come up here and tell you that it's harmful for those communities because they perpetuate certain stereotypes, right? We tell you that on their side of the house there seems to be a problem solution mismatch in the examples that they gave you themselves of cannibalism in South America. That's not something which is intrinsically linked to how their religious deities and prophets are portrayed, right? We tell you that this comes from a place of like cultural superiority and Western cultural imperialism, and this isn't something that goes away when you tell them to take permission before portraying certain religious deities, right? What do I mean by this? By their very examples of like cannibalism in South Africa, or look at how India is portrayed in the West as this land of like snake charmers and like where you go for spirituality and to emancipate yourself, and it's just spirituality and on the other hand absolute beggary. These perceptions are not something that change when you engage in their model of where you need to take approval from relevant religious bodies, right? It's about the cultural outlook that Western countries have, and that's not something which is going to change. So all their material about how it prevents stereotyping by not allowing religious idols to be shown in the media is completely discarded, right? Now moving on to our constructive material. What do we tell you? What is the importance of media in today's world? We tell you that television, cartoons, media in general is one of the most accessible forms of art in today's world. Today, as an individual, I'm less likely to read a thesis by Mark Galanter on law and caste in India, or read a lengthy editorial piece about how religion is badly affecting certain communities, than like I'm less likely to engage with that than a simple portrayal on TV or something that is shown to me in a form which is much more appealing to me or which is much more understandable and accessible to me, right? What media allows you to do is that it allows you to capture the power of imagery and the power of satire, whereby you're allowed to criticize a religion or where you're allowed to talk about a religion in a way which is accessible to more people, in a way which is understandable to more people, right? What are the consequences of this? Firstly, we tell you what this does is that it allows media to act as a tool of dissent. What do we mean by that? We tell you that when you give control over the people as to how they want their religion to be portrayed on screen, when people can express the different ways they want the religion to be portrayed on screen, they can challenge the normative, or like they can challenge the dominant narrative which is often pushed by religious heterodoxies, right? Why do we need to challenge these dominant narratives? Because very often religious narratives tend to be extremely conservative, tend to be extremely offensive towards certain minorities, in the sense that they may be misogynistic, they may be homophobic, they may be like against trans, they may be transphobic, all of that, right? We tell you at the point where you don't allow the different like portrayals of religious deities, different portrayals of prophets, or a conversation about religion to occur organically, you completely shut out the use of media as a tool of dissent, or as a tool to question these kinds of biases and these problems which exist within the religion itself, right? We tell you what portrayal of religion does in the media is essentially two things. Firstly, it allows you to reflect on the problems that plague your religion and start a discussion around it at the point where you can start galvanizing change and start galvanizing a conversation when these problems are portrayed on screen and the narrative isn't completely controlled by the heterodoxy. And secondly, we tell you that it allows people to bring religion into the modern world, right? We tell you that people experience different religion in different ways today, and by allowing people to reconceptualize religion as something which is not only contained in the pages of the scriptures, or which is not contained to the Quran, and by allowing religion to progress, and by showing that it's capable of adapting to the modern world, what we allow people to do is make what we allow it to happen is make religion more accessible to people, more relatable to people, at the point where they feel like they don't have to conform to what was said 1000 years ago. Even the religious heterodoxy believes that they're allowed to experience it in a way which is more relatable to them, because the portrayal is one which is controlled by them and not by a religious heterodoxy, right? So it allows you to bring it into the modern world, where you allow religion to adapt to modern structures, and you tell people how you can opt into those structures, right? Lastly, we tell you what this policy does, whereby you give complete power to the religious body to approve a particular piece of art, is that it strengthens the power of the religious heterodoxy in itself, right? Where you're much less likely to question what the religious heterodoxy itself is asking you to do, because they have complete control over the narrative surrounding that religion, right? We tell you that this prevents decentralization of religion. What do we mean by this? What we mean by this is that no particular religious community is monolithic in any way, which is where we believe Prop has mischaracterized this debate, right? Like all Muslims or all Christians or all Hindus aren't this monolithic group who want their community to be represented in a similar way. At the point where you give one body the power to that, like the power to control the manner in which this entire religion is displayed, you don't allow the voices of voices of different groups within that larger religion to come to the fore at all. You don't allow people to express religion or profess religion the way they want to, and you force them to conscribe to what has been like prescribed by the dominant heterodoxy, right? What do we mean by this? We mean by this things like portrayal of the black churches, right? Or portrayal of, say, like the Vaishnava sects within India amongst the Hindus, right? You don't allow their portrayals to come to light, or you don't allow people to express religion, to express their religious beliefs in a way that is meaningful to them because of this policy. So because of the two things we tell you: first, how media acts as a really important tools of dissent and allows you to reflect on the problems that like pervade that religion. Number one, that's not likely to happen if you adopt their policies. And second, people are not going to be able to like practice religion the way they want to. We are very proud to oppose this policy.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. To continue the case for the affirming team, I'd like to welcome up the second speaker.
Okay, I'll start in like a few seconds. If you listen to closely Conversely, to negative case, there were a lot of overclaimed outcomes that eventually were not proven by the end of the first next speech. I'll just construct them effectively one by one. But before that, I just want to remind the panels that negative had two burdens. First is that how the publication and portrayals of these characters of the deities don't massively impact communities that are associated with those deities. And second, why free press, like what they wanted, guarantees that we have less toxic environment for conversations surrounding religions and silencing the voice of minorities. They were unable to prove, and will show you why they cannot claim the material cannot they cannot claim the material. So first, let's look at the freedom of expression in media, because the first contention was that we should allow individuals to be able to portray these deities as freely as they want to be. Let's just listen to how they prove that particular argument. First, they say the reason why freedom of expression is important is because it is accessible. Therefore, they can criticize the religion. Therefore, therefore religion can adopt to modern structures. The first criticism I have of this analysis is that why can't all these things happen even with the correct depiction of religion or with the accurate depiction of how religion works? And then they try to be convenient. They say these are all, the freedom of expression is important because now it can become a tool of dissent. We think that this outcome is immaterial because the way that they tried to prove this was convenient. They assume that there is no control. They assume that in this particular country where this media exists, that there is some control of media in that particular country. Now, I don't get how like media cannot be a tool of dissent in this country, right? Because we think dissent can only happen if the country even allows for a dissent to happen. They cannot assume that this debate happens in undemocratic countries where they don't allow dissent to happen. Like, why would Saudi Arabia suddenly allow the media to draw Muhammad in a funny, weird way, right? I just don't understand why suddenly you can come into of dissent. But we have to be reasonable because negative was never reasonable in the way that they characterize how this world happens. We think that this media can also become a tool for dissent in America or like in countries that allow for some freedom of expression in the media. But we're going to contest. We say, even if we were to be charitable in your work, why is it that freedom of press isn't, freedom of media cannot be absolute? Because the spillover effects are massive, because we need to take into account public interest and what happens if you allow for freedom of press to materialize. We think that press can be a tool to also incite hatred, right? Things like hate crime, things like defamation. We think these are like the nuances in first affirmative that they never wanted to engage with to begin with. But even if you don't buy that, we think in reality, freedom of expression isn't always absolute anyway, right? You have laws that criminalizes hate crime. You have laws that prevent defamation because courts and states realize that there are massive impacts if you defame somebody or if you hate crime, if you do hate speeches, because those things will lead to more hate crime, therefore more civil unrest in society as well. So we don't think that they can claim their benefit at all. But then thirdly, they said, but religious authorities are detached from what the community feels about the prophet. This is extremely convenient for them. I refuse to let them get away with this assumption because they assume that only one body controls the narrative. Therefore, there will be more stereotype. If you listen closely to how they try to argue this, there's just absolutely no link as to why is it that if you control one narrative, means suddenly you have more stereotypes. They don't actually answer to the fact that people can hold these religious bodies accountable by the communities because they see, because these communities are a representation of the of that particular community, right? That they're not gods; they're just people who facilitate things like discussion, who are like portrayals of the community, what the community feels about a particular religion. So I don't know why is it that suddenly all these religious authorities will become extremely detached from the community, given that they are the voice of that particular community as well. But even if it's true, right? Let's say so even if it's true, we think that even if there are like different religious authorities who have different interpretations of how like deities and the prophets are, we think that's good because at least now the media and the filmmakers are exposed to the different interpretations that exist within society. Therefore, they're able to more be critical in the way that they want to portray these prophets and deities. We think that's the exclusive benefit that they can never claim under their side. But crucially, we also think that they were being extremely convenient and dismissive towards the entire material that came from first affirmative. What were those materials? One, the first affirmative explicitly says that this narrative empowers media companies to be more disruptive and more reckless in their publications. Because status quo is the media maximizes centralization of these portrayals because one, they want to placate to subscribers and consumers like were already established in first F. But second, sensationalizing those portrayals also mean that you draw more attention to your consumers and your like viewers, right? And also because this is merely a marketing attempt for the media companies to profit from the inaccurate portrayals, because now you can like make fun of these deities or make fun of these prophets, because you know that it's something that people will just enjoy and not think badly about it. That means, and this argument is important because it means that it's far harder for us to call out again production houses like Lionsgate or 21st Fox Century. For example, there are three important reasons why this is more likely to happen in negative. One, we have to look at the power asymmetry between the press media corporations and some random person or some random group who wants to call out against the media because of the portrayal. One, when companies like NYT, for example, or Lionsgate production houses, right, disgustingly publishes a disfiguration of a particular deity, they have no incentive to listen to that random voice that is calling out against them. And like logic, they have no incentive to listen because one, why would they want to listen to a random voice that just say, oh, this is bad, oh, this is not how my community or how my deity is? Like logically, if you really think about it, right, they will never be able, the power asymmetry, the gap is extremely wide between this random person and this huge media corporation who has all the money in the world, who has all the influences in the world to be able to counter against whatever that random voice is saying. That means you will never be able to call out because the target audience for this particular random voice is only extended to like things like social media. But that's not enough because the target market and the audiences and the loyal consumers and customers that this media corporation have are massively bigger than what this random voice wants to say. They have things, because they have things like your shareholders, they have things like your producers, your attorneys who can easily shut down their voices by like doing like hush money to them, or like intimidating them by doxing them online, for example, to which at that point that random voice cannot counter because they just have less resources to do so. Now, that's like one part that it wasn't able to respond to. But second, the second important analysis that we brought to you was that the fact that even if you successfully call out, right, the harm is already, okay, so even if you successfully call out, the harm is already done. That means people have already misinterpreted and have a misinformed perception of that particular deity. But crucially, people have also commercialized the clothing that represents the community as well, because it's just something funny, like how Forever 21 or Urban Outfitters are doing. We think this massively impacts the way that communities also feel about those particular deities, right? We've seen like big corporations make fun and commercialize Native American headdress or the Palestinian skulls kafaya, for example. And people are more likely to buy into the narrative that these big companies do because it's something that's just aesthetically pleasing for them. It's just something that's nice for them. We think you cheapen the identity of that particular community. That means you don't look at that community seriously and don't think them as equal human beings who deserve a accurate depiction of their portrayals and not be made fun of at the end of the day. We've already seen this, and that's bad because it's extremely mentally traumatizing to it's extremely mentally traumatizing to this community, because that commercialization of that particular product is a constant reminder that they can always insult you and slap you in the face. The fact that you have no power to talk about it and counter those narratives, that exploitation of your identity continues. Therefore, you always silence the voice of the minorities. We think that should not be the case from negative. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to welcome up the second speaker from the negating team to continue their case.
Hey, am I audible? Thank you. Panel, before I begin with my substantives, a couple of points of rebuttal to the case brought to you by the affirmative. The affirmative has come here and they've spoken to you entirely about how cultural appropriation and silencing the voice of minority groups is bad. However, the way in which they substantiate this seems to conflate minority religions with minority cultures and minority identities. We believe that examples such as Indiana Jones, etc., are not really applicable to this case because they represent a certain type of culture, and that's a greater example of colonial cultural hegemony than it is of misrepresentation of religious deities and their prophets. What do we think religious deities and prophets look like, and what do we think that valid examples are? We think the example of American gods is a good example, so we'll take that at face value and we'll try and engage with that. American Gods, for example, deals with a specific fictionalized scenario where the cultural power is now the United States, and gods and goddesses are losing their ability to exist in the modern world because people no longer believe in them. It is an example of a powerful commentary on the impact of religion and the way in which new technology is overwhelming the force of religion as a cohesive social good in the world. We believe that that's an incredibly important social commentary, and that their interpretation of the goddess Kali, for example, is purely that, their interpretation, and they give us no reasoning as to why the interpretation provided by the author and the TV show should be silenced in favor of their view. We believe that it's far more likely that commentary such as this, and commentary that is in any way unfavorable to religion, is likely to be shut down on their side of the house. Why do we think so? They've told us that it's likely that freedom of expression is already going to be rampant and people are going to be offensive purely for the sake of it. We believe that that is not the case. Why do we think so? We believe that religion, as it stands in status quo, is a large center of power in society. While we might claim that there's a separation of church and state and that religion is not involved in governance, even in liberal Western democracies, we see a large amount of religion being considered people's major social group, where people are less likely to criticize their religion because they risk things such as excommunication from their church, they risk the fact that they're no longer going to be accepted in their society, and they risk a massive backlash where religious people protest their movies, protest their TV shows. Using the example of India, for example, a large number of movies and TV shows never actually get released in the country because there's a fear that there will be protests against it and there will be that this is not a valid form of expression. So we believe that in status quo already there are massive safeguards that exist in the form of defamation laws and hate speech laws that prevent people abusing the freedom of expression, and we believe that that does not go away when we continue this. On the other hand, we believe that further empowering religion, as Aratika already told you, legitimizes religion as a center of power and legitimizes the fact that religion has a hegemony, that centralized religious authority has a hegemony on how religion is interpreted in the modern world. And why did we tell you that that is something that's incredibly important and something that's incredibly dangerous? We told you that it is important to consider how representation works. For example, taking Jesus in Christianity, we've seen how in Western countries, Jesus is depicted as a largely white individual because that is something that's considered more appealing in those countries and it's more likely to reach a large number of people. However, it is necessary to enable people to customize religion for their own purposes and people to adapt on this hegemonic conceptions of religion. We believe we're likely to lose out on that, whereas the Catholic Church is less likely to agree to somebody portraying Jesus as a Mexican or portraying Jesus as black in order to appeal to that community, despite that being a net social good, where it enables the spread of religion and enables other people outside of the mainstream to opt into religious ideals. And we believe that that's something that they lose out on their side. Secondly, we told you that religion does not exist as a decentralized structure. To the extent that things such as the schism in the Catholic Church, where the Orthodoxy has broken up into the Baptist Church and other religion, shows the fact that there is a large centralizing tendency in religion, and this will only go to further that and go on to prevent people from expressing their religious ideas in their own ways. And finally, whatever they told you about media, they told you that media is the most powerful organization in the world, and it's likely that media is going to play religious gags to get it.
I've paused timer. We will just wait a few seconds, and hopefully it will sort itself out. Hi. So I paused the timer at 4:05. You had just finished talking about religion not being decentralized. So if you just go from the media point after that.
Sure thing. Would you like me to turn off my video or something? Because I'm getting a message saying my connection's unstable right now.
Yeah, we can turn our video off for the rest of the speech too if you'd like.
Thank you. That'd be great. Please let me know if I'm inaudible. I'll start from wherever it comes.
Yep, awesome.
Talking about how media is all powerful and it's likely to play off religion for a cheap gag. We tell you that that's unlikely because media continues to exist in a society where media anchors need to go back and need to go to their churches on Sunday, and that is far more likely that the media is going to be respectful of majority religions in any situation, not less likely to make fun of the minority to the extent that they believe that there's a possibility of backlash against that. We don't think that even on their side of the house, they can show you that cultural appropriation and things like the Washington Redskins are going to go away because those aren't depictions of religious deities or religious prophets. That's merely making fun of a culture, and they can't tell you why that's going to stop. However, we have told you that why it's possible that the legitimate free expression is likely to stop. And while they have told you only about the positives, we believe there are also certain negative aspects to allowing media to control the narrative. Why we told you about things like the Catholic Church and about Muslims, the religious Islam, we also want to talk to you about examples such as the Church of Scientology and other groups, wherein these are religious organizations where they continue to act in manners that continue to oppress people and where their prophets continue to make statements that are incredibly damaging to members of their own congregation and members of their own group. To the extent that these groups also now have the ability to dictate to what extent people are able to represent these practices and people are able to represent their beliefs, we believe that it is more likely that exposés and documentaries that detail these religious organizations or pseudo-religious organizations are likely to be curbed. And we tell you that that is again incredibly harmful because it allows these groups to only push media narratives that are only beneficial to them, and it continues to deceive people into opting into these incredibly harmful practices. In short, what are the possibilities on either side of the house? Their absolute best case scenario is that in certain situations, certain religious figures such as Farley and American gods is likely to be portrayed positively or not portrayed at all, which they seem willing to accept. We tell you that while that may be the case, we believe that it is important that people be allowed to express these ideas, even if they are negative to the religion, because firstly, it is the way in which each individual engages with that religious idea, and it is a manner in which everybody is able to cooperate and able to build their own conception of religion, which is incredibly important to them. Secondly, we've told you that it also enables the spread of religion and it enables minority communities to opt into religious ideas that are not seen in the majority. And the majority is likely to clamp down on it because it is contrary to their worldview. And we believe that empowering this worldview is something that's incredibly damaging and something that does not need to happen in states, does not need to happen. Finally, we've also told you that it's incredibly necessary that people be given the ability to criticize religion, even if they are not necessarily doing it in the most healthy manners. We believe that it is more likely that people are going to engage in constructive criticism rather than simple hate mongering or in simple mocking, because of the fact that religion continues to be an incredibly important part of the world, and people who are criticizing these things largely tend to come from within those communities, and shutting their voices out prevents the fact that religion can continue to expand and continue to grow. We believe that things such as portraying Jesus as having followers who are gay and bisexual and making it possible for those views and those narratives to be part of mainstream movies, mainstream TV shows and books. We believe that that is something that's likely to be shut out by the Catholic Church, where they believe that that is harmful to their religious ideology, where they believe that that's something that's not given credence to in the Bible. And we believe that that is harmful because it prevents minority groups being able to adapt religious ideas. In short, we believe that decentralization of religion is an incredibly beneficial idea overall, as it enables both the spread of religion, it enables minority groups to access religion more effectively, and it enables religious ideas to grow away from being conservative tools that continue to oppress groups. In short, on all of these reasons, we believe we take this debate.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now, to close the substantive portion of the affirming case, I'd like to welcome up the third speaker.
Second, I'm just going to time myself. Side Negative wants to make this debate wholly about criticism of religions and them claiming benefits such as the ability for minority communities in a religious community to have more power and autonomy over their interpretations of of their particular religion, without fully explaining to us as to how do they gain all of these impacts exclusively from having portrayals or imagery of these particular deities or gods at the end of the day. I do not know why criticisms can only occur if there's a portray, like a criticisms of the religion of Islam can only occur with a portrayal of Muhammad that most likely will be very inaccurate and most likely be offensive because of the incentive structures of media companies in the West. We do not know how they will gain a majority of their benefits. But before going on into key substantives, let me just go through it one by one through these key questions, right? Through these key issues. Number one, let's just analyze who are these religious authorities and do they have a connection with the communities that they serve. Second, let's talk about challenging of dominant narratives if they want to do this, and their benefits that they want to talk about. And third, this idea of customization of religion. I'll be bringing back a bunch of material that my previous speakers have told you, right? When it comes to these religious authorities, right, Affirmative says there's a disconnect between these authorities and its people, so these portrayals will never be as true to that community. We've already answered, even in Hannah's speech, religious authorities are held accountable by their communities, right? That if a majority of your community thinks that you are doing a bad job, you will be criticized because there is an importance of these particular religious authorities to do their job correctly because they are deemed as representatives of that particular community. So we think that there is definitely going to be a very good relationship when it comes to these communities and that particular authority. So we still believe that whatever that these religious authorities have incentive for them to do their jobs correctly because they don't want to be out of a job. Second, challenging of dominant narratives. This is something that they really claim to get. Affirmative says it's good because now portrayals under their side, because portrayals under our side will probably be dominant narratives and it harms minority communities. They never give an example of what these minority portrayals probably look like. Okay, sure, probably religion has sects and different interpretations, but regardless, for example, if you're in the Muslim community, regardless of you being Sunni or Shiite, I think both communities can agree that portrayals of Prophet Muhammad that was done by Charlie Hebdo was something that was actively harmful to that particular community because the incentive structures of Western media companies most of the time they're not altruistic. They're most likely to sensationalize it. They're most likely to make you offended because they want some sort of a reaction from individuals, or they want to make it whitewashed so that it's palatable so that they can sell it to Netflix and white people can watch it and everybody thinks it's great. These are the kind of incentive structures that would completely affect the way these portrayals would have. They haven't properly told us the incentive structures under their side, to which there is going to be some level of portrayal that is accurate, that will also be deemed, that will also serve these minority communities in these religious communities at the end of the day. Because I think if you're already a minority community in your community, there is literally zero incentive structures for Hollywood to pander to you. If they don't even care about what the dominant narrative of what Muslims believe what Prophet Muhammad should either be depicted like or not, I think that there is zero incentive and zero effects for your minority communities if as a whole they've already deemed you as minorities as a whole from the perspective of Hollywood. So I literally do not see any form of benefit that they could claim. Also, I don't know why they assume criticisms can only occur with imagery. I get it. They say that imagery is a lot easier for you to understand compared to like an article or something like that, right? Which means that people consume it a lot more easily, right? But even if imagery is easier for individuals to consume and like digest, but because of it all, because of like how easy it is, we think the harms are only exacerbated because the second people just watch it, that thinks that there's less likely for inability for them to actually understand more and have incentive to read up more because of how quick it is. And by that time that happens, that because of the power symmetry of these media, for example, like Western media just gaining so much access around the world, people have already consumed that and perceive it as such. And by the time that you want to correct them, it is too difficult and you don't get the same power structure, you don't get the same resources in order for you to combat the wrong portrayals of what was very important to you, right? We think as of that point in time, it is difficult for you to correct it, and a lot of the times the harms have already existed, in which stereotypes are now emboldened, in which it harms the interactions between the privileged majority and your minorities, for example. We think as of that point, when you want to correct, you will be deemed as someone who's just sensitive because, hey, it was a fun show and I enjoyed it. I also don't know how apparently they want to claim benefits such as decentralizing like religions, right? This is such a heavy burden for you to adopt in this motion when it comes to just portrayals of deities and gods, right? I think centralization of religion occurs because of so many things, such as like just because people wanting some form of a body in order for them to navigate through their belief systems because they want individuals to interpret it for them, such as politics, such as culture, and also just governmental structures, all of these things. I don't know how a portrayal of Black Jesus would suddenly eradicate the whole entirety of the Catholic Church. I think that's a very ridiculous impact that you want to claim, and you have to tell us why criticism, because of the imagery and portrayal of a Netflix show on American gods, can now suddenly take down this whole power structures. We think these power structures will still exist either way. We don't think that's important. But also, even if you want to, let's weigh the benefits of these criticisms, and you weigh with the massive harms that we talked about that they never properly responded to, by the way, the things such as like that how identity is something that is so important, to the point in which if people actively attack these communities' identities, there's an ability and likelihood of individuals being radicalized because they deem as like their personhood is being attacked, and that's why they have to defend it to the point in which they are okay with harming other individuals who attack them. We think that's a massive harm, and by that point in time, any criticism of that particular religion is already just is going to be so terrible and harms individuals who do not consent to these particular acts of retaliation, right? And we also think such as the ability for individuals to also feel like their identity is being taken away, being commercialized. We think these are very terrible things that people constantly have to see and have no ability for them to correct because of the power asymmetry. These are things that they never wanted to deal with, and we think these things are completely harmful if you weigh it with the benefits of some level of criticisms that we don't think even leads to a proper impact at the end of the day. Lastly, they wanted to talk about customization of religion because they want to make religion more modern in order for individuals to feel some level of connection to it so that they can be happy and religious at the same time. I also do not know what kind of communities these specifically are, but assuming these are probably liberal sects of individuals in certain communities, right? I think they don't completely need to rely on this imagery at the end of the day. I think these individuals have already, the fact that they can interpret religion in a liberal way, it means that they've already attained some level of happiness from it, and we think that they're fine to deal with this. In fact, we believe that the ability for these liberal, we think this imagery can even harm these communities even more, because now the dominant, like the majority group of that community can now actively attack you because it seems like you're trying to ruin the sanctity of your religion on a global scale. I think these are abilities that can harm these individuals who are just trying to interpret religion in a way that they're happy with. We think it harms them even more because it makes them even more vulnerable, because they don't, most of the time, these liberal communities, they don't have a religious authority to back them up. They don't have the amount of numbers in order for them to protect these individuals. We think under their side, they do not claim majority of these benefits at the end of the day. We think in order for Team Negative to take us down, they really have to deal with the bulk of harms that we've told you, which are already impacted and very clear. We don't see any of the benefits coming through that we've been prouder to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech. Now to close the substantive portion of the debate, I'd like to welcome up the third speaker from NEG.
Yeah, am I audible? Perfect. Just give me 5 seconds. Chair Speaker, in their best case, for Hindus, they take away Indiana Jones while they continue to keep people like Apu, who from The Simpsons, who have done way more harm to stereotyping to Indians than Indiana Jones ever could, right? We believe that stereotyping exists in the current scenario because of cultural norms of superiority that they do not address. On their best case, while they do that, on our best case, we continue to have a powerful mode of dissent against strong religious hegemonies that have for years oppressed and continue to remain something that continues to remain something which it was over thousands of centuries ago. Right? We believe religions necessarily need to adapt, and they only adapt when there is external dissent and they have incentive to change, which they would not if they are the people who are controlling the narrative. Let us understand that Christianity has been able to finally embrace homosexuality in a manner whereby Pope Francis can now come out and say that he's okay with it, only because of facing external dissent for years and decades, right? We believe that is a benefit we stand for. These are not comparable. Now, given that, how do you need to adjudicate this debate? We believe to win this debate, there are 4 questions that we need to look at. Let us understand what are those. First, what are these portrayals? What do religions look like, and in particular, what do religious structures look like? Right? We believe that at the point whereby they continually negate our characterization as to why religions themselves are generally fairly like non-homogeneous, heterogeneous categories, is something that is problematic, right? We tell you religions themselves are one, the religious structures themselves are generally one, centralized, and tend to represent two, the dominant narratives within those religions themselves, right? We believe at the point whereby there are, say, 4 or 5 major religions in the world, we believe that those necessarily do not represent the experiences or the ideologies that most of the people within them represent, right? We believe at the point whereby Hinduism represents, say, over 1.5 billion people in the world. We do not believe that most people actually associate to Hinduism in the similar manner. People are within that religion are as split as ever, right? Given that characterization, why do we believe religious structures themselves tend to be people who are generally not open to dissent or accountable, as they just say completely come up here and say, right? We believe religious structures have for centuries have had histories of not being accountable, right? We tell you religious structures have for centuries, for example, like Christian Catholic Church literally had to be invaded, and like there had to be several doctrines so that they could separate themselves from the church, right? We believe that religious structures themselves, one, profit off people's already existing ideas, two, cater to the dominant narrative, three, we believe that they necessarily already attain a position whereby they do not need to say cater to like every individual within that religion unless and until there is a mass pressure that is put. We believe that at that particular point there is no incentive for them to change, or no incentive for them to allow dissent from within those religious communities, because they have complete hegemony over that. Like we have not heard much characterization from that. Don't let them get away by saying that they can just be accountable. Secondly, what are these portrayals likely to look like? From what we hear from their side of the house is simply that, hey, media is Hollywood, and to the extent that media is Hollywood, they are likely to sensationalize. Let us understand how this happens, right? We tell you that first, media is not the sole form of Hollywood, or where, like, say, portrayals can be done. We believe that comic strips, or say even music videos, such as say Kendrick Lamar going up and dressing as Jesus in one of his videos, is a powerful tool of dissent that still exists on our side of the house, right? We believe that individual artists and individual people who have that ability to go out in the media or in the public or in the newspaper and simply just publish a cartoon is something that still exists on our side of the house, even if all of their points are taken up, right? Regardless, we believe that Hollywood structures don't necessarily always work in a manner whereby they can go out and do anything, right? Let us understand why Indiana Jones continues to be criticized today and is a relatively niche example in that criteria, right? We tell you at the point whereby Outsourced was a pretty racist show that was started by Hollywood. It had to be cancelled just after one season, was because of the kind of backlash it faced due to the portrayals it had made of Hinduism and people within those communities, right? We believe at that particular point, the Western ideologies Hollywood does have some form of checks and balances mechanism through mass dissent, but even if they don't, we believe that they are still likely to do that, even in their best case, through cultural norms, even if they don't do through deities, right? We believe at that particular point, the harm that exists, that thing that they need to prove on their side, is that deities in particular have something that cultural norms don't, which they haven't shown you through speech, through all three speeches. Now let us understand this substantive point as to why we take the debate. Where are religions likely to be better off? A major point that we brought in from our side of the house was that religions continue to always have issues within themselves because of everything that has happened in the past, right? We believe that they continue to represent ideologies that were often a thing of the past, say 2000, 3000 centuries, 3000 years ago, right? At that particular point, we believe that all religions have a particular point where they keep trying to evolve to be able to be more representative of the society and representative of society's needs, right? At that particular point, we believe that this definitely alienates individuals who do not fall into the majority scheme of things, right? We believe that the things like having to come into terms with homosexuality for Christianity, or say for Hinduism trying to get rid of say the abhorrent practices like sati, are things like they have had to do over centuries because of the kind of things that they have been brought up with, right? We believe that religions themselves are in bad. However, there are often issues that they need to work out. Where are they likely to work this out more, right? We believe at that particular point, they are much more likely to work it out when there is criticism, which they definitely need to respond to, right? We believe that they need to respond to criticism within those media portrayals, because one, it is from an external source that they cannot simply regulate, such as say like within their own structures. Second, we tell you that it is definitely something that they need to respond to, is because the mass appeal that portrayals can do, and it is unlikely to be suppressed the similar way, say, the people can do it for within their own structures, right? We believe that religious structures themselves allow them to have sort of power within their followers, whereby they can necessarily decide how people do it. Now, how people actually take part in like different roles. We believe at that particular point, at least on our side of the house, we give them a possibility of dissent, which we've seen happen, say, through like movements against homosexuality, which we don't on their side of the house. A massive benefit we exclusively show. Secondly, fourthly, the point about minorities. Let us understand their conception, right? Their conception of minorities extends solely to the fact that people from within people from another religion try to suppress another because of the cultural, like say, ideas that they already have about these religions. One, then they need to mechanize why these cultural ideas themselves go away when like the religious deities cannot be portrayed. Second, then they need to show you, even if they go away, why a religious deity is something that is so intrinsic to an individual, or why is that a cost benefit that they are willing to take in light of the benefits that we bring. On our side of the house, we'd rather show you that people likely opt into those religions, even if they are minorities within those religions, because of what they believe in, right? We believe that people likely to opt into Christianity, even though they are, say, like not a majority sect within it, because of the way they've been brought up. At that particular point, what benefit do we show? On our side of the house, then we are able to show that at least they can carve a representation for themselves within those religions, right? At the point whereby people can show up with the Jesus as like a black individual or like as a Mexican individual. We believe at that particular point, they have the ability to reimagine and recreate narratives that have pervaded religions for centuries. At that particular point, that is something that does not exist at the point when religious entities alone have the choice to say how they would be done, right? We believe at that particular point, at least this gives them an ability to navigate within those ideas without having to say fall out of the religion or change their ideologies altogether. On our side of the house, we show you massive benefits to which the sole like minimal like harms are shown on their side of the house. Very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that speech. We now move to the reply portion of the debate, and I'd like to welcome up the leader of the negating team.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Thank you. Panel, firstly, let's deal with what each side brought to you on what religious representation looks like. On Affirmative's case, it appears that they seem to be conflating religious deities and their prophets along with cultures of minority communities. We fail to see how this debate can be about misrepresenting the culture of of minority communities in other continents, as done in Indiana Jones. We rather think this debate exists when dealing specifically with figureheads in religion such as Jesus or Muhammad, and we feel that their representation for what the affirmative needed to engage with. Secondly, in dealing with what media looks like on either side of the house, affirmative again seems to be taking a very, very strange approach to this definition, claiming that media exists only in terms of Hollywood, where they represent only minority groups outside of their own country, outside of their own lived experiences. We tell you that that's not always the case. This debate doesn't exist only in terms of Hollywood deciding what they want to portray in major TV shows. It also exists in what movies are released by minority communities in India for themselves. It also exists in terms of documentaries published by various houses. It exists in commentary and sketches put out by various comedians and comics in the New Yorker, for example. We tell you that all of these other forms of media also come within the purview of this debate, and in that light, it is necessary to analyze the points brought to you by both sides. Affirmative has told you specifically that in their very limited paradigm, it is likely that people will be less offended, and it is more likely that their views will be respected. We told you that this isn't necessarily likely the case because there already exist mechanisms that ensure that blatant religious mocking and blatant hate speech are curbed down upon in the form of hate speech laws and defamation laws. And we believe that this already acts in a manner that limits the amount of speech just for the purpose of shocking sentiment is curbed down on. We told you that to the extent that these groups want to continue to expand their audience, where even American Hollywood directors are unlikely to make fun of China because that's an important market for them, that views outside of the majority in these countries are likely to be respected. Secondly, on the point of freedom of expression, they've told you that it's more likely that there's going to be blatant hate speech and that there's always going to be a power differential that's never going to be redressed. We've told you that this power differential is in fact far less extreme than they portray it to be due to the overwhelming presence of religion in modern society and the way in which religion continues to exert influences on people. Instead of looking just at Hollywood, we told you to look at examples of countries like India where movies are not even released because of fear that there's going to be a backlash from religious groups. We told you that in this status quo, it is incredibly important that we not further empower religious groups to determine the narrative around their religion. We told you that it's necessary to allow people to be able to interpret religious ideas in their own manner, both for the purposes of expanding the reach of religion and for the purposes of enabling effective dissent. In terms of the reach to minorities, all opposition did was tell you once again that they believe it's more likely that their status quo will happen. They never engage with why it's more likely that minority groups are going to be able to opt into religious organizations, where things such as the church in Goa is going to be different from the church as seen in Rome. They never told you why it's possible that both of these paradigms can exist concurrently on their side of the house. And secondly, we didn't go out to tell you that dissent only happens through cartoons and cartoons are the only form of dissent. However, we did tell you that dissent is importantly shown through cartoons and through media because of its mass reach and shows a progressive change. They seemingly admitted that in their last speech, but they seem to try to minimize it by talking about how other forms of dissent exist. However, they overlook the fact that portrayals can extend to things like novelizations, etc. And the fact that relevant religious authorities tend to be centralized and tend to be even one group means that there's a certain hegemony over this discourse. And there's a fact that why they need to principally justify why these groups have the ability to dictate what is appropriate in terms of dissent, which they fail to do so. And for all of these reasons, we believe we took this debate.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. And now to close the debate, I'd like to welcome back the leader of the affirming team.
Test, am I audible? Cool. I have three very quick comments before I move on to the meatier parts of this reply speech. The first is in regards to the arguments of decentralization of religion by the side of negative, as if we're living in the 1800s where the religion is still primarily based within the Middle East or just primarily in the Middle East or for other religion probably within Asia. We don't think that is specifically the case, given that globalization is true and that's just the reality of the world. That reality of the world doesn't allow for the argument of side negative to become one that is exclusive. This decentralization of argument can happen under ours as well. The second comment that I would like to make is in regards to the engagement of context for the context that we're given. They told us in the reply speech specifically that our paradigm is limited. If you were to specifically listen, even from my primary speech within the first affirmative, we included satirical contents and the context that they so want to have under this side of the debate. They just never actually listen. The third comment that I would like to make is in regards to this concession of fear of backlash. This was also made within the reply speech. Glad I listened. I think they made a concession that there is a higher probability of the backlash from society, especially when they are major proponent of that particular society, when there is a form of dissent to happen. That means largely their benefits also becomes minimalized at that point of time. I'm very concerned with their case as of right now. I have two questions for you today. The first, how does it affect minorities? We think this is the primary question that should be acknowledged within this particular debate, because we think even from the side of negative, the only recharacterization of the debate that they said was just that this lazy response of, oh, it would happen anyways. The second question would be criticism directly engaging with the argumentations coming from the side of negative. So first question, how does it affect minorities? Now, the extent of response that we heard coming from the side of negative is in twofold. The first they told us is that the example is strong, especially when it comes to Indiana Jones. Well, you're missing the point. You're misconstruing the point that we were trying to make. What we said was that the power of Hollywood is exemplified by how individuals see indigenous communities within South America, especially after Indiana Jones. We're not saying that that's the example specifically for this motion. We're telling you how powerful Hollywood is. But secondly, in regards to how the harm would have happened anyways, within this particular context, we don't think that's necessarily true, because we don't think that's necessarily true, because at the point where you allow for the communities to have the ability to have the agency to control how the characterization of their communities look like, perhaps not allowing for media companies to let Muhammad be seen as a person who engaged in bestiality, is the best way for them to be able to control the characterization of their own community. That then doesn't that means that at least even if we remove a total portrayal of those communities within media as of right now, at least it doesn't harm those individuals when you cause large misrepresentation that are offensive towards those particular communities. Then secondly, they gave us the benefit, if you were to be given the chance to portray your deities and prophets without having to ask approval, you can have things like Black Jesus. Well, those things can exist on the outside too, because we agree that the religious communities are not a monolith and they can exist in multiple subsets. And those things would mean that necessarily that benefit isn't something that's truly exclusive towards the side of negative. But lastly, I just want to point out that they have never engaged with the trade-off that we have given to you in terms of the weighing, right? When it comes to, even if there is zero portrayal or even if there's less portrayal of those communities, at least it is one that is controlled by them, and at least it is one that is not offensive. Second question, will there be criticism, or will the criticism in this particular sense be good? They told us that it acts as a tool of dissent. Well, what they didn't provide us, as pointed out by the second affirmative, enter affirmative, the exclusivity of this mechanism to be able to provide for that tool of dissent. We think that you have to then gauge the conflict of interest between the communities affected and offended, as well as the party that you so want to talk about. At least under outside of that, we provided you that way, given that there's the propensity of harm is much larger towards the whole community affected by those portrayals. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech, and thank you both teams for that debate. I'd like to invite both teams to virtually